Hello, welcome to the Ashtabula Art Center. My name is Tricia Kaman, and I am being featured, my work, in a retrospective show here, a solo show, and it's been up for the month of August. So we're going to give you a little preview today, and hopefully you'll want to see it for yourself in person. And this represents 50-some years of work. This piece here is Isla in black and white. This is a recent portrait that I did of one of my favorite models. She modeled for me for the last year in preparing for this exhibit. So I have several different images of Isla. And then this wall shows some other portraits as well as a figurative piece, which is what I specialize in. I wanted to thank Mary Urbas, who is a friend of mine, and she helped curate and design this exhibition. She's going to ask me a few questions as we go through and prompt me about my work, which she personally selected.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about this piece right now, the still life and your plein air painting pieces, because so many people know you for your portraits and your still lifes in your studio, and plein air painting is a little bit different.
Right. The plein air I've done right along as kind of a break from being in the studio for so many months of the year. I love going outdoors when it's nice, up by Lake Erie and Sandusky Bay, where I like to do my plein air work. And it's from life, again, with the live flowers and fruit in front of a body of water. And every bit of it is done right there on location, with the bugs around me and the wind blowing, what have you. That's what I love. This piece is called Himalayas, and it is my first official pastel painting I did when I was 14 years old in the summer of 1965. And I brought it to this exhibit to show how early it was I decided and took this seriously, that I would be full-fledged artist for the rest of my life. So this was done not from life, but from a photo. The only piece in here that claims to be done from a photo. But I thought it was a good addition to show people where I started. And this piece won a prize in Sandusky at an open air exhibit when I was 14, and I was the youngest artist to participate, and that was a great boost and message to me that I could do this. The rest of these have been done over the years in my studio. These are different people that model for me, some of them professional artists, some of them interesting people that I just simply invited to pose for me. This guy here, the Scottish hat, was quite interesting. I did this one actually at the Akron Society of Artists with a number of artists there studying under Judy Carducci, who is a famous pastel artist, internationally known, especially through the Portrait Society. And this is more recently done in my studio. This is Murray Hill behind the model, the sitter. And it shows the neighborhood. I love working at Murray Hill. And I've been there 35 years in my studio. This piece is one done from my daughter, my granddaughter, Harper, when she was like 2.5. And I pretty much had her memorized. This piece is done of a neighbor of mine, Carol Ottstadt, in 2005. I had invited her to pose for a group of us. and she was just a wonderful model, interesting person. And I like to get to know the people that sit for me a little bit of, it's a casual conversation back and forth between the sitter and myself, especially on breaks. So I like some of that to come through, that connection between the model and the artist to come through the images.
Can you talk a little bit about working, with these pieces? Were these in your studio at Murray Hill? But can you talk a little bit about the different, maybe approaching using pastels versus oil, and how you start? Is the process the same? I mean, and then maybe even addressing the one image behind you with the kimonos, because I know that having the models wearing kimonos has been a recurring theme in your work.
I'm especially interested in the draping of the kimono on the figure, and I have done series through the years back and forth with that theme. I just like the drapery, and I love patterns, so that brings patterns into my work. She actually, when she posed at my studio, it was January, and she was cold. So thus I think that's how we came up with that pose.
But what about, talk a little bit about how you approach pastels versus maybe oil, because it's a little different mindset as far as how you build your surface, or not.
It's not.
Okay.
Remarkably, it's not. I start out the same way, and that is thinking about placement on the page or on the 16 by 20. Where am I going to place the figure? What is the negative space? I look at it more like abstract. To begin with, it just starts out light and dark pattern, composition. I feel like I look at it like it's a puzzle, and these pieces have to fit together in an interesting way. So the negative and the positive areas are equally important.
Okay, if you could talk a little bit about this wall. I know that the cowgirl piece behind you is one of your daughter Kate's favorite paintings. It's also one of the favorite pieces by Mitch, your assistant and our wonderful videographer today. Thank you very much. And then the dual figures best friends is a piece that I showed in the gallery at Lakeland Community College, and I believe that was the first time I invited you to be part of the show. I came down and did a studio visit, and I was quite taken by the composition, the size, and just you as a painter. So could you just talk a little bit about those two pieces?
Okay, sure. I'll start out with Best Friends, and that's a piece that Mary Urbas selected years ago when I was first invited to show at Lakeland with the featuring women's exhibition for the month of March. I don't know the year, but it's been a while. This piece was actually, I have to look at it. This was done in 2008, but these two gals came into my studio, and they were from Case, so they were nearby my studio, which is in Little Italy, and they just had casual conversations while they were posing about their boyfriends, about their classes, and that kind of thing, back and forth between young ladies giggling and all kinds of things like that. So I think some of that comes through, and a lot of people identify with that time in their lives. I wanted to point out this piece. It's very recent, and my model Isla was in my studio for this. She brought this beautiful costume. It's part of her collection. She married into a Vietnamese family, and this was her wedding gown. So It's called a Audai, and this is what the bride wears on her wedding day in that culture. And I thought it was very interesting, and this is one of my favorite colors to paint. So that was a real fun project for me, challenging but rewarding.
Okay, well, this portrait of Olga is probably one of my favorite pieces of yours in the show. I saw this hanging at the Ursuline College show when Frank Frake was the gallery director, and I think you had a solo show there. And I just remember seeing that piece, and I came up to you and I said, I want this piece for my show, for my From Woman show that I curated. So, and I love the fact that it gives the kind of the homage to John Singer Sargent as far as the draping and all. But to me, it's the fact that you can paint a composition in white, and yet there's all different kinds of colors that are integrated. So if you could maybe just kind of talk a little bit about my favorite painting.
Well, this is one of my favorite paintings too, because it hangs in my home above our fireplace, and I've missed it since it's been here at the show, more than I realized. But this is Olga, Polish friend of mine who is a dress designer, and I kept asking her, please pose for me, because I loved her white dress, and I couldn't wait to paint the shades of white. And I do love capturing those very subtle differences, the variations of white. I learned to see color from Jose Cintron, who was my first portrait teacher, and then consequently studied Sargent's work at many of the museums. I would go purposely to Detroit and Chicago to study Sargent's work at the time, like previous to doing this. But one of my favorite artists, so I think you were right in picking that up, Mary.
I think part of it also was just because of the scale of the piece also. It has such a commanding presence, and that's also why I chose to design the installation and have this be the centerpiece of this wall, so that when you came into the gallery, you would immediately be drawn to this painting.
Right,
So
it is a large
beauty.
space. It's a large space, and it does have a commanding presence, I guess.
Yes.
I didn't realize until we brought it in to this space.
Right. And then what's nice about this gallery space is you can stand back to get the whole vista view of the wall itself, and see how the pieces are juxtaposed against each other, the way that the format and the colors and the color saturation, all of it.
Right, and it's a high key, these values. It's a high key piece, and I do alternate between dark palettes and light palettes. It varies that much. This is one of my favorite still lifes. Did it in New York, state of New York, with Rose Franson was having a workshop on still life, and I thought, wow, if I can study with her, that'd be great. And she had all these various still lifes set up, and I walked in. This one called to me, and I was especially interested in the reflections in the cup and how that related to the shapes and the oranges, the colors. The biggest challenge was mixing the colors for this, but I love being able to get the hot pink against some of the greens, and it's just a piece that I think we can get lost in.
Okay, this is a portrait of a model named Kathy, and Kathy was a model at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and when I was a student, I painted her. I would conservatively say that there are probably hundreds of drawings and paintings of Kathy. out in the wild. That's why when we were working on the collection, I felt that this piece needed to be included. And for people that are watching this video, and any CIA students are going to recognize Kathy immediately. And I saw her recently a few years ago, and I came up to her and I just said to her, I said, do you have any idea how many times your image has been captured and how much we loved having you as the model? So can you just talk real quick a little bit about that, the composition, the cat in the corner, which is unusual because you don't usually include animals in your composition.
Kathy had modeled for a group that I rented a studio with, and we worked together for about 16 years. So she came to model for us in several different poses. But before she came to us for this session, I noticed it was kind of hard to talk to her and get her to open up about herself during breaks and all. Until I asked her, did she have an animal? And she said, yes, I have a cat, and its name is Sunshine. So I said, would you guys mind if she brought her cat to model with her? And oh my gosh, she just came to life because of her cat being there. And I think it was one of the more interesting pieces that I've ever done.
Okay, this collection of pieces, which you mentioned, the grisaille oil painting technique that you learned when you attended a workshop. One of the reasons I picked this grouping of pieces is because it was such a different color palette from what you normally do. And you had mentioned to me that when you start all your paintings, you start with undertones and understudies, and so that's why we included some figure studies that weren't quite as developed visually, but then you've got the portrait in the center and the one of the gentlemen behind you, which you can tell that it's a little bit quicker study, but the vitality, the energy in there kind of really speaks. So if you could just talk a little bit about the workshop and how that impacted you and how that altered your practice.
Sure. I had attended workshops in Philadelphia at Incaminate. It's an atelier that Nelson Shanks and his wife Leona opened up. Well, my daughter was in Philadelphia at the Academy studying art. I watched Nelson do a demonstration and said, he's my next teacher. And so he had taught us to do lots of gestural work in this grisaille method, like such. And I did like a whole week of just life models, quick sketches. Some were 2 minutes, some were 5, and maybe at the most 20 minutes. So my arm was pretty sore after that week. But there were we would wipe it down, do another gesture sketch, and then wipe it off, and many. And then with this one, Nelson came over and said, that's a keeper. So I didn't wipe it off. And so that remains evidence of the workshop. And what he taught was capturing the gestural motion from life, and then to retain that and go for the big shapes, light or dark. And he'd say, is it in the light or is it in the dark? Make a decision and then stick with it. So that's how I start all my paintings, with this undertone of studying light and dark shapes. I'd like to point out this piece, which I painted in 1974. With the first group of artists that I painted with, across from Haley's department store in a gallery space, invited by Sally Bergman, and Jose Cintron helped facilitate that move away from the college to private sittings with a group of artists. at a studio, and we would hire models every Wednesday to come in and sit for us. And this was Bonnie Oceans. That was her name. She was a flower girl. She sewed flowers on the street corners of downtown Cleveland. And I borrowed this back from lovely lady Marilyn Evans, who was willing to loan it to me for this show. I hadn't seen it in quite a few decades, so it was a treat to borrow this piece. As you can see, I did paint in a looser style back then, but remember, I was in my 20s and had more energy and went at my paintings differently than I do now. So it's kind of fun showing you the different stages of my work. I'd like to thank the Ashtabula Art Center for providing this beautiful space for my solo show, and shout out to Nancy Bratz for inviting me to do the show here, as well as Mary Urbas, who designed the show and selected the pieces from many she had to look at my studio and in storage. She curated this arrangement of pieces of mine. And my two assistants, Ricky, who's been with me 10 years, and Mitch is a newcomer to assisting me, but he's been fabulous. He's the videographer for this. And I almost forgot Ohio Arts Council, who helped fund through the Opportunity Grant part of this expenses for this show. And it was an outreach to the community of Ashtabula, and the intention was to bring Cleveland to Ashtabula and a little bit of Ashtabula to Cleveland because of my workshops, my joint workshops, one that I hosted at my studio in Cleveland, and then the second one was here in the middle of these paintings, a workshop, one-day workshop, painting from life. And I had a live model for 4 hours here for that class, and was sharing what it's like to paint from a live model.